We are delighted to have two of the network staff with us today, and I want to tell you briefly how it happened that they're here. Dennis and I have been members of Network for many years. In fact, Dennis was a member when it was just beginning, which says something about his age. The Network prepares a wonderful annual report, and I was reading the annual report for 2023. I'm one of those crazy people who reads annual reports. And there is a map in here about supporters per state. And all of the states around us have better colors than West Virginia has because they have more members than we have. So I called to say, is this really true? And it is. So hopefully, by the end of today, you are going to realize that a membership in Network is an incredible investment and that you are all going to members today. So and let's get the color on this map changed. Louise Fitzgerald, where did Louise go? Oh, Louise was here a minute ago and she'll be back. Louise is the new coordinator of Service, Justice, and Peace. And she and I have worked on this together. She's done most of the work. So I just want to make sure that you connect with her, and any volunteering you want to do, talk to Louise, and she's going to be happy to talk to you. Without further ado, I just want to mention that that Meg and Sister Eilish worked hard today to reduce a 3-hour workshop, to condense it to 1 hour and 15 minutes, so that you can enjoy this glorious Sunday. So you can thank them for that too. And here they are.
Thank you so much, Eileen. I am Sister Eilish, and this is Meg Olson. As we're presenting, if you can't hear us for whatever reason, please just wave your hands at us and we'll adjust the microphone. So we are thrilled to be with all of you, to be here at St. Agnes. This is both of our first times here, and we both said that this will definitely not be our last. It was a great drive in. We had a wonderful evening last night, and we hope to come back again. And so, as Eileen said, we're going to do a condensed version of our 2024 election year training, Informed, Engaged, and Committed. So we're going to be going through a lot of this pretty fast, but we've been passing it around a sign-in sheet. If you want a copy of the PowerPoint slides, we are happy to send that out to folks afterwards, and we can get that out to you sometime this week. So just a real quick introduction. I am at Network. I've been in Washington, D.C. since January, but I've been on staff at Network for 4 years. I am from Cleveland, Ohio, and I am a Sister of the Humility of Mary.
And I've been at Network. It'll be 9 years next week. My claim to fame is I moved from St. Louis to Washington on the 2015 Nuns on the Bus tour. I don't recommend that as a way of moving across the country.
And so today we are going to do a very quick introduction to Network to talk a little bit about who we are. We're going to go through parts of our Equally Sacred checklist and talk about multi-issue voting, and then talk about ways to be involved this year. So, as we begin, I'm going to pass.
All right, so we always like to start all of our presentations with what we call a buzz question. It's just going to be a quick turn to your neighbor. You're going to have a total of 4 minutes, so 2 minutes each. Be sure to share the time. And our question right now, just turn to your neighbor. How are you feeling about this election year? Go. You have 2 minutes, so you might want to switch. All right, can I have just 2 people tell us, 2 brave folks, how are you feeling about the election this year? If you raise your hand, I'll come over and give you the mic. Up, our student, okay. Keith, right? Not Steve.
Regardless of outcome, I'm trying to remain hopeful, though I am anxious at the same time, just hoping that regardless of the results, things do improve for the better regardless of how it's done.
Thanks, Keith. All right, one more person. How are you feeling right now? Okay.
As I was just telling Eileen, I'm feeling pretty confident, frankly. I'm feeling quite confident about, at least the way I'm a lifelong Democrat and very involved in things over in Washington County, and have been in campaigns and everything. And I'm feeling pretty good, actually. I'm just hoping I am reading things right about the American people, but I feel pretty good.
Well, thank you both for sharing. I just want to stress, and you did, but Network, we are doing this through our advocates, which means we are doing a nonpartisan voter education campaign this year. So, yes. So we're not going to be telling you who to vote for or how to vote for or endorsing any parties, but we're really looking and going to be grappling with the issues. You're fine. Just wanted to make sure everyone knew that. All right, Eilish.
Okay, so just a really quick introduction to who Network is. So at Network, we educate, organize, and lobby for economic and social transformation, and we do that at the federal level. And we were founded about 52 years ago by 47 Catholic sisters who came from across the country to come to Washington, D.C. to form this organization. And at that first meeting, they passed around a basket to collect money to fund the first years of the organization. And so at Network, since our founding, we believe that a just society includes everyone, and that we must, in order to have that just society, we must value people over the accumulation of profits. So we talk about what is needed for a thriving community, for the 100% to have what they need to live dignified lives. And that we always recognize that we live in an interconnected world. So what happens to me affects the next person and the next person, and so on. And so as we do this year we're talking about why are we multi-issue voters? So I want us to really think about that. Why are all the issues important to us? Why is everything interconnected? So I'll start off and I'll ask you, Meg, why are you a multi-issue voter?
Yeah, thanks, Eilish. It's interesting because I think we always say that, we're all drawn to this work because of one particular issue. And then when we take a step back, we see the interconnectedness. So I really came to this work really deep in labor and really caring about unions and living wages and access to health care and everything like that. And then when I got really involved in the work, I realized that our most excluded people in the workforce are migrants and immigrants, especially those who are undocumented. And so that's what really then got me involved in immigrants' rights and thinking about, just what it meant to have a pathway to citizenship, or how do we treat our farm workers more fairly. And, from there it even gets more complex, but I would say, labor to immigration are probably, why I'm a multi-issue voter. And how about you, Eilish?
Well, I think, it's always interesting, Meg, when you start out with immigration, because that, for me, was my single issue. Professionally, my background is as a social worker, and I worked in refugee resettlement and immigration work, and I was all in. And I realized, though, that I couldn't advocate for my clients if I wasn't also looking at housing or healthcare or education, or drinking water in Cleveland, or public transportation, that it was all connected. And so, as we're going on today, I want you to keep thinking about what are those issues for you, and how is it a much bigger picture than one issue or two issues or something like that. And so today we have with us our Equally Sacred checklist. And this is something that we have put out for the past 3 election cycles. And that on the Equally Sacred checklist, we're saying that we are voting our future so that everyone thrives, no exceptions. And we're talking about making sure that we are voting for candidates who promote the common good. And Pope Francis said that we cannot uphold an ideal of holiness that would then ignore injustice in the world. So what are we looking at? And then this year, we kind of structured our Equally Sacred checklist a little bit differently, and we'll go through that. But we are focusing on the freedoms, that we all have the freedom to be healthy, the freedom to care for ourselves and our families, the freedom to be free from harm. But what does that mean, and what do we need to make sure that everyone has access to those freedoms? And one of my favorite sayings that we have at Network, and I think it was our colleague Colin who's kind of started this, is that when you vote based on a single issue, no matter what that is, it is like looking at the world with blinders on. And so we say that it's immoral to allow a single issue to outweigh a candidate's position on things that might harm immigrants or asylum seekers, low-income families, people of color, members of the LGBTQ community, the environment, and so on. And so we're really encouraging people of faith, all of you, all the people that you're connected to really listen to your own conscience, to really think about the freedoms. What are we voting for, and how are we voting our future? And kind of just to continue that briefly, that when we vote that single issue, we are allowing all other social sins to continue unchecked. And so we want to make sure that we're ending economic exploitation, that we're working together to end racism, to end xenophobia, to end environmental destruction, and to create the world that we want to see.
So I just want to say the issues on our Equally Sacred checklist certainly do not cover every issue that we as Catholics need to be concerned about. The 6 freedoms that we have are really those that Network has been working on since our founding in 1972. But so let's talk about this word freedom. I think we heard it a few weeks ago quite a bit. And I will say, Network, we started... When we started this document back in February, it was really this idea. We had read this book called some of us had read this book called The Persuaders by Anand Giridharadas. And we were really captured by this word freedom because I think, it has a lot of connotations. And there was this idea that freedom belongs to all of us, regardless of our identity, regardless of our positions on things. And the more we're able to claim that word, the more we're participating then in the dialogue of who has the freedom to participate in our democracy, or who has the freedom to have access to health care, regardless of their zip code or the color of their skin or their citizenship status. And it also, what's really important about it is that we're then saying what we are for. I think a lot of us, network included, we sometimes say, oh my gosh, the world is on fire. We're just devastated about the violence, down at the border, what's happening. And we're so sad about the poverty that children, regardless if they live in Appalachia or inner city LA, come join us. It's important work. And that's not going to get everyone to come sign up. We need to be motivated by what we're for and what present things. We need to demonstrate that we're approaching this work of justice with a sense of joy, right? We see the joy, right? Pope Francis says the joy of the gospel. And that we're for community, we're for the flourishing of everyone, we're for peace in our nation and in our world. And so by framing it this way, we're really, being inviting and inclusive and building a movement. And so, we're going to go through a couple of our freedoms on the Equally Sacred checklist. And again, if you put your name on, we have our Equally Sacred checklist here, along with some other really great documents that I hope you all pick up. But some of the stuff that we're going to go into, if you put your name on the sign-in sheet with your email, we'll send out kind of some of our deeper materials if you're interested in talking more about the details. So the first freedom we're going to go over is freedom to care for oneself and one's family. And this goes back to that idea that it's people over profit and that economic justice belongs to all of us. We know that the reality is that people are struggling, right? In our nation, in 2022, 1 in 9 people, including 1 in 6 children, lived in poverty. We know that childcare costs have soared over 200% in the last 30 years. And we know that housing and food costs, in recent years, but even, before that, are making it really difficult and putting people in choices of, do I pay for my medicine? Do I pay for groceries? Do I pay for rent? And this is the economic reality of far too many of our friends and neighbors. And so our first goal is that we have guaranteed paid leave and childcare to support all families. We also want to make sure that we have a living wage and that we're protecting the right to organize and to join unions. We want to make sure that housing is affordable. And we want to make sure that we're investing in education, our public education, making sure that people have access to community colleges and grants to support them, and for trade schools if they choose not to go to college. There's also, I wanted to say one more thing about that, because this is a good story from a trip to West Virginia we did a few years ago. One issue that Network has been working on for a really long time is expanding the child tax credit. And we saw that under the American Rescue Plan, and we wanted it so badly to stay permanent. So badly that 2 of my colleagues and I drove almost in the middle of the night from DC to Charleston to go to a rally where the West Virginia Council of Churches and the Quakers and a bunch of other folks were having, and they wanted us to come. And what I heard when I talked with some mothers and fathers who had lost their monthly payments after it ran out, but while they had their monthly payments, they said, I didn't have to sell plasma. And that floored me. That stopped me in my tracks. Suddenly having this monthly payment of the child tax credit meant that they didn't have to sell plasma to buy their children's shoes. And I carry that story right here from, I know West Virginia is a complicated state and it takes a long time for you all to get to Charleston from here, but I carry that story with me from your state every day when I think about the child tax credit. And so speaking of taxes, we know that the wealthy are not paying their fair share of taxes. We know that income inequality has soared over the last 40 years, and that the wealthiest 1% of our nation, own a third of our nation's wealth. And we know that the average person pays a higher percentage of their income with taxes than the wealthiest among us because of tax cuts and because of loopholes. And this means that we're not, taxes supporting the common good, roads and schools and programs and all of these things. And so Network wants to make sure that the wealthy are paying their fair share of taxes, wealthy and corporations, to promote the common good. And again, we want to expand tax credits, whether it's the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit for rent. Some people talk about renters credits even as well, because that's the equivalent for mortgages, to ensure that all people are building up equity and are able to, not have to make those terrible choices that I've heard stories about. And we know that we've made a lot of progress in the last several years, with the Inflation Reduction Act, and with which said that corporations have to pay a certain amount of taxes, and so we want to keep that momentum going to really respond to the income inequality in our nation. We also, another one of our freedoms that I wanted to focus on was the freedom to live on a healthy planet. And this is really to make sure that regardless of where people live, whether they live in eastern Kentucky or Flint, Michigan, or in the Pacific Northwest, that they have access to clean air, clean water, and safe, healthy, and stable places to live. And we know that this is not a current reality in our time right now. We know that with lead in water and so many other things, with mountaintop removal mining, with fossil fuel industry and all of those things, that we have a long way to go on this issue. And again, we have seen tremendous progress in the last few years, again with the Inflation Reduction Act, in terms of capping carbon emissions and really promoting green jobs, and we want to keep that momentum going. And so we want to invest in we want to continue investing in that sustainable future instead of fossil fuel corporations. And we want to make sure that Congress is passing things like the FLOW Act, which removes lead from all pipes, regardless of where someone lives or what their zip code is. We want to stay in the Paris Agreement, right, and be a good neighbor globally. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Eilish.
And so the last one that we are going to focus on, the last of the freedoms, is the freedom to be healthy. And this isn't just about healthcare. This is also about making sure that everyone has enough food to eat. And it's that we know that here in the United States, we have the highest maternal mortality rate of any industrialized country. And that there are 14 million people across the country who are at risk of hunger every day. And that includes at least 1 in 5 children. And so how are we taking care of everyone? How are we looking at the common good? So we know that we need to make sure that we are working to protect and expand affordable health care. The Inflation Reduction Act extended postpartum coverage under Medicaid and gave parents across the country access to safe and affordable health care. It's so important. We want to end the injustice of medical debt. I know there's people in my family whose lives have been upended because they had an emergency surgery. And we're supporting policies that reduce the cost of prescription medicine so that patients can afford the life-saving care that they need. And so what does that look like? What can we all do together? Together we can come together to end the Black maternal health crisis. And this helps parents, whether they are Black, whether they are brown or white, whether they live in rural areas or cities or somewhere in between across the country, to make sure that we have adequate health care. And also, incredibly important is making sure that we're going to end hunger in our country by investing in programs like SNAP, like WIC, and school lunch programs. And we have seen how powerful this is when we all come together. When we were working on our Thriving Communities campaign, we were calling on Congress and the federal budget to make sure there was funding for these programs, because they were threatening to cut the funding. And we were able to stop the huge cuts. And so we know how powerful that is. We are going to take just a couple minutes if there's any questions that people want to ask. We can try to give some good answers.
I don't know if you noticed, but the Knights were handing out blue bags today for groceries to help people, and we have a local community, Shepherdstown Shares. We do really well at Band-Aids, but I think what you're telling us is that really, unless we deal with the structures and policies, we're not going to really make the changes that you're talking about. So you want to say more about the difference?
So I love that comment, because one of the things we talk about in one of our trainings is we talk about charity and justice, and that we need the charity, we need the food pantries, the organizations that pass out those necessities, that are the stopgap measures, the Band-Aids, because people need to have their immediate needs met. And at the same time, we also need to be asking, why is this need increasing? What can we do about it? It's great that we're able to meet this need, but what would our town look like if there was federal funding to meet the needs? And so often we say, take the stories from the pantry or the Shepherdstown Shares, and when we call on you for lobby visits, share those stories with your elected officials. It's the impact stories that will help create that change and address the structural issues in our country.
So I work at the federal level on housing, and I work for an organization where a lot of times we have difficulty. If there's a candidate or a policymaker that does one thing that they don't like, then people don't want to talk about it. And so how do you all get past that?
Past that? That's an excellent question. Yeah, so when you have a candidate or a policy that is passed that people don't like, and then how do you get past that to continue the work?
I think that happens all the time. And actually this morning I was talking with Dennis over breakfast and Eileen about, there's a way to advocate where we're still seeing, and especially as people of faith who believe, that we're still seeing, our neighbor in that lawmaker. And we need to hold people accountable for those issues. We're specifically talking about President Biden. and his record on immigration that we're not so thrilled with, and yet we needed, right? Because, and especially Network, we work on 8 different policy areas. We have to be able one day to say, you know, we're not happy with Title 42 and what's happening, and the next day we have to celebrate, you know, this incredible, you know, green climate jobs, because again, all these things are connected. And I think it's really when it's done in a respectful way, that you can do that. And it's really building those deep relationships. And so our advocates, you know, we encourage them. This is not just a once-a-year lobby visit. This isn't everyone come to the Hill and traipse through the Capitol Hill. But it's really that ongoing relationship building and introducing yourself and showing up to their town halls and you know, getting to know the local office. And it really is a partnership at that point.
And I think, too, real quick, and then I'll come to you, it's also about learning about the issues in your own context so that you can, you know, be able to have that respectful dialogue with, you know, whether it's an elected official, whether it's at a community forum or something like that.
When I have conversations with conservatives, often the dialogue follows along the course of it's a zero-sum game. That if we help this person, it comes out of my pocket, or if I help that person, I'm disadvantaging somebody else. And I don't know how we overcome that, because my grandparents are immigrants. My family are all relatively fresh off the boat. Everybody in my family has brought something to the table. Immigration brings wealth to this country, and they don't bring, you know, criminals and so on. And so on the whole, I would like to know how we can, as a country, understand that we are an immigrant country and that we have lots of room here and our economy can just grow. There's nothing holding us back except this idea that there's only just so many slices of bread to share around.
That is an excellent question, and it's how do you bridge that divide? How do you begin to have those conversations? Now, if we were doing our full training, we would launch now into the part that would address that. And we'll touch on it a little bit. But I think one of the things that we often talk about is if you look at everyone in the country, on either end is about 25%. 25% on the left, 25% at the right. None of whom are persuadable. You're not going to change anyone's mind, for good or bad, you know, whatever that issue is. But in the middle is 50%. And that's what we call the persuadables, that you're able to start having those conversations about. And so I'm happy to share with you information too, and we can continue that conversation. We're going to talk now about some of those ways to have conversations and building effective narratives in the form of talking about biases. And I think often this is something we know biases. We know that how we see the world is colored through our own experiences. You know, we tend to prefer one thing or one person or another. But it's how do we see this vision of freedoms? How do we see that our country is great and it's the immigrants, everyone brings something to the table. And so we're going to go through this a little bit, kind of what gets in the way of seeing that vision. And so the first one, and I think this is something that we all know, is confirmation bias. That when we hear something we agree with, we're like, excellent. I'm going to listen to this. And if we hear something we don't agree with, we shut down. And it's because we like to have our own ideals, our ideas reinforced. But there's also a complexity bias. So we know that the human brain prefers a simple lie. So maybe that's immigrants bring crime and drugs, simple, one sentence, to a complex truth? And maybe, like just using immigration as an example, maybe it's the complex truth is that the reason, what are the root causes? Is it our involvement in war? Is it, economic injustices? Is it climate change? And it becomes much more complex, and we want to hear what's the simple thing. And that simple lie is what gets repeated. And then we also have community bias, and that it's very hard to see something that your group, whether it is a parish, whether it's your family, circle of friends, whatever that group is, if that group doesn't want you to see something. So I often talk about in my religious community, I would say by and large, the majority of us all see the same things, think similarly, and it's much easier than saying like, oh, I disagree with 97% of you. And so it's easier to, when you're a part of something, to believe what everyone is hearing. And it's kind of that herd mentality. But that also gets in the way of the truth that's happening. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and mm-hmm. That we're all immigrants, right? Mm-hmm. And we've forgotten that when each immigrant group comes, that there is hatred and biases and then it changes with each generation, and that is what we're still seeing today. Mm-hmm. Right, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Fair. And I think we can talk about that. I'm happy to talk more about that with you after. I think there's a lot of around immigration. I'm going to talk from my own experience in working in immigration, both with people who came as refugees and came legally, and those who fled violence and sought the asylum process, which is also a legal process. But I'm happy afterwards to talk with you about that.
All right, so a few more biases. This one's pretty straightforward. If people seem really nice, we're going to be open to hearing what they have to say. And if they're not coming across as your cultural perception of what is nice and kind, you might shut down a little bit. And this is actually one of my favorites, cash bias. And this is really about that idea that what's good for the economy, right? What's good for the stock market must mean it's right. Right? We have a lot of anxiety about the economy. When we start talking about the economy, we're forgetting about the people who've built that economy and who are really part of it. Right? And I'm thinking about our economic pastoral, that it said the measure of any economy is how the poorest and most vulnerable people are faring. So maybe here in West Virginia, our economy is, well, is it okay for big coal? Or is it okay for the fracking? Is it okay for, I'm not sure what else might be like driving, if it's a policy that helps them, but let's look a little deeper and see who might be hurting because of the policy. And then contact bias. And this is basically, right, if you're not in relationship with someone, you're not going to understand their experience. And I think this goes to your question, too, about, that division. If we're not realizing, and, right, there are political forces that really want us to all be divided. And so if I'm not having those encounters, if I'm not trying to build relationships across racial lines, across ethnic lines and economic lines, I'm not seeing that. And I'm not seeing that my humanity is bound up in my neighbors. And we really have to work hard to be as fully inclusive as possible when we're talking about these policies. Even if it seems to benefit one group over another, at the end of the day, it benefits most of us, if not all of us. And so really, how can we not be so disconnected? So, we have time for maybe 2 responses. Which are these you really recognize? Either like here in Shepherdstown, or if you want to get a little bit more vulnerable, maybe even here in St. Agnes, or maybe at your campus. Yeah.
One example I wanted to use of cash bias is West Virginia's, at least most recent history. So West Virginia is a state that has been built mainly on the coal industry for many years. Hear me out though. Because of how big the coal industry has gotten, there is next to zero clean water in this state. And also, if we built that industry right and still kept, so let's say we still kept all those jobs or whatever, but built them in a way to where we still had clean water. Bottled water costs the average person about $500 per year, United States. Guess if we invested in clean water in this state, each person would only have to pay 53 cents a year for drinking water.
Wow, thank you. Anyone else? I think that was a great example of cash bias.
So I guess I'll go with the complementary bias. I feel like, especially now when you look at politicians, or when I'm one of those 50% in the middle. I don't know what I am at this point, but if somebody comes at you saying, oh, you support that candidate, they're pro-choice, you're supporting a baby killer. I mean, that's going to turn me off to having any further conversation. And so I think that especially in the debates on Tuesday, probably not even going to watch it because I don't want to deal with just the mudslinging. So I think that's at force a lot these days.
It's also a great example. Thank you for sharing that. And so for this kind of last session, we're going to think about the multi-issue voter categories, our freedoms. We're going to think a little bit about the biases, but what are we doing here? Like, how are we called to engage right now? And so I'm going to read this because I know it's probably hard to see on the screen, but this is really one of my favorite quotes that we've been using, and it's from the late Congressman John Lewis. And he said that democracy is not a state. It is an act, and that each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. So how are we building that beloved community? And one of our favorite things that we have been doing lately, so I'm going to give Meg this pen. Yeah, that's the poster. Is we are doing what we call power mapping. And so I'm going to ask you all to just kind of shout out, what organizations and groups are you affiliated with? And Meg will write them down. Yeah, we're going to take about 3 minutes. Shepherd University. Anything, yeah. Mm-hmm. Say that again. Sleep in heavenly peace. Got it. CASA. Gi- oh, Giant. Okay, got it. Community Foundation. St. Agnes, yeah. Free clinic. Habitat. Boys and Girls Club. You got Shepherdstown Shares. Let me see where Meg is. Jamestown Alumni. Jefferson JCC. Oh, archives. Oh, I like that. Girls on the Run. DOD. St. Vincent de Paul. And there was an archives one too. Yeah. So, and this is just in about, not even 2 minutes. And Meg, if you can hold that up. Yeah. If we think about it, this is just an initial brainstorm, how connected we all are. That our connection ripples out far beyond us and all the different people that we can touch. And thinking about how we talk, thinking about how we have conversations with people. And that is a whole lot of power just sitting in this room with the organizations you named. And so, what are you going to do now? We're going to talk about Act Impact, about getting ready for the election in November. But it's also about making sure that we're engaged people in this country. And so first, this is not just about making sure getting out the vote. It's making sure that you and everyone in your lives has a plan to vote. Because we know that when you have a plan to vote, you're much more likely to actually go. So I always talk about my brother, who, as politically and active as I am, he is the exact opposite. He is 5 years younger than me. He voted in his first presidential election much later. He didn't vote right away when he turned 18. And he really did it because I was nagging him. And his idea of voting is just like, if I get to it, I get to it. If I don't get to it, okay. And so it's making that plan. When are the primary or general or special elections? Because those are just as important as the November election, if not more in many cases. Talk about, do you vote by mail? Or where your polling location is. Now, last year I was voting in Ohio, and I went to vote, and I think it was a primary election. I went to the polling location. It was a community center, and they told me my polling location had changed. 2 weeks earlier, I had no idea. And I was like, oh, okay, let me go back. What IDs do you need? Across the country, the laws around IDs have changed. So maybe you're volunteering with different organizations. Maybe it's through St. Vincent de Paul. And making sure that the people who are voting have proper identification that's needed. And making sure that you know about the early voting or absentee ballots or vote by mail, and you're able to explain that to other people. And just again, making sure you're talking with people about, when are you going to vote? Do you need to take time off work? Do you need a ride to the polls? Plans for childcare, etc.
And you can find out all of that information. We work a lot with the League of Women Voters, and they have this incredible website called Vote 411 that we'll continue referencing, to find out, like, where do I vote? Who's on my ballot? All of those things. So we're going to walk through quickly kind of Network's engagement menu for this election season. And all of this you can access through Network Advocates or our Nuns on the Bus website. You can get to it from both ways. And so, as Eilish was saying, the first thing we really want to do is make sure that others have a plan. So if you can think of 3 to 5 people in your life that you just want to check in on, make sure, do they know if they're going to vote absentee, do they know the dates and those types of things. We actually have a wonderful worksheet on our webinar. It's like a little checklist. It's like, okay, the last day to register is, the first day to vote early is, the last day to vote early. Just walking them through, they can stick it on their fridge. It gets them across the finish line. And this goes for everyone. One of our colleagues is organizing college students starting this year and beyond. And when we first heard how difficult it is to get a college student from registration to the ballot box, we were like, oh boy, this is a lot of work, but we're excited to do it. And again, as you're having these conversations, and think about, we can't all do everything, but maybe you can give a couple people a ride to the poll. Or maybe you can say, hey, I'll watch your kids for like an hour or two if you need to stand in line. I understand, of course, this marvelous parish attracts people from at least 4 different states, if not more. And so even just being aware, okay, maybe I'm volunteering in West Virginia, but I live in Maryland. Those are very different states, so I need to educate myself about what the rules are in West Virginia so that I can be giving accurate information when I'm talking to people about voting. So we work in a lot of coalitions, and so, and of course, just like you all, Network can't do it all. And so if you're looking to write postcards or help register people to vote, or, that wonderful project Souls to the Polls, these are just a few organizations that we recommend. League of Women Voters, Faiths United to Save Democracy, the NAACP, all of these organizations have lots of resources as well and lots of ways to get involved this election season. So we're encouraging people to, maybe it might be a little too late to start a campaign, but there's lots of ways to join. And again, this is all nonpartisan. Phone banking, right? We know that these are effective. Sending postcards. A lot of our congregations of women religious, they might not be able to drive anyone to the polls anymore, but I can bet you those sisters are writing their postcards to send off to other states. Are you registered to vote? Are you going to go vote? So all of these things. This is our new favorite tool. Well, okay, I'll speak for myself. It's my new favorite toolkit because when my first, it was my first non-presidential, so midterm voting. And I had just moved to Chicago, and I got to my polling place, and I looked at 20 judges, and I had no idea what to do. And I sat there and I was like, okay, I'm just going to vote for the women because that's equity, right? Oh my goodness. Had I had a ballot research party, if someone had invited me, I would have been able to, with my peers, research those judges. So this is really bringing your friends and family together, looking at your sample ballot, maybe have some snacks, maybe make it a potluck, and get everyone together so you are confident about every name on that ballot so that we're informed and engaged voters this season. Don't be like me in 2004, okay? Maybe host a voter registration drive. Parishes can host voter registration drives. You do have to look at your local and state laws and make sure you're keeping it nonpartisan. Really thinking about venues. We have some of our advocate teams are doing voter registration at their parishes, at their farmers markets. They're setting up tables, but they have to follow the rules. So they talk to the county folks and get it right, bringing all the material and making sure that you're following up with folks. We're also encouraging people to really get engaged at the poll level. We know that the number of people who are signing up to volunteer as poll workers has really declined, and this is the number one way we know that we have fair and safe elections, is to have well-trained poll workers. There's also, depending on where you are, and this is especially in Pennsylvania, that in certain areas, that we need poll watchers. And this is really someone who's a step up from that, who's really making sure they're observing and making sure that all laws are being followed. That, if people are in a long line, that they still are getting the access to that ballot, to their voting booth. Sadly, we know this year there's going to be a lot of misleading information and disinformation about voting, trying to purposely disenfranchise people. And so this is a great way to make sure, as an authoritative voice, as someone educated in the community, to say, no, that's wrong. So let's make sure that people have the correct information. And there's lots of ways to be really creative. We have some yard signs you can put out, nonpartisan, focusing on our issues. We're seeing more and more when network members are emailing me, I'm seeing little reminders in their email signature, like with the final date to register early in their state. I'm like, wow, that's fantastic. That's just a little free advertising. So lots of ways to get out there and make sure that everyone is exercising their right to participate in our democracy. Father Brian Massengale, who's a good friend of Networks, just a month ago, was just reminding me that the right to participate in our democracy and in our common good is our primary right as Catholics. And I was like, wow, I think we usually start with dignity of the human person, but this right to participate, that is our baptismal right. So, in the last 4.5 minutes, we did it in under an hour and 15, we would love to know, if there are folks here who are already involved in GoTV efforts, or are anything percolating where you're like, wow, we could maybe do this, or I have some ideas about how I want to participate in the last 2 months of this election. So anyone want to share what you're thinking of doing or already doing? Oh, Elise.
Postcards.
Jerry and I have been doing postcards to swing states, and we've watched a couple of their webinars afterwards, and it is very effective. You kind of wonder, is this really going to have any impact? And it does, in getting people out to the polls. It's nonpartisan. We're just telling people, get out to vote, make a plan to vote. And there's still time to do it. They don't mail them out until kind of the last minute, end of October. So postcards to swing states. You can just Google that and get some info.
Thank you.
Well, I'm running for Jefferson County Commission. When the Supreme Court of the state denied the appeal of the two commissioners, they announced that the seat was open to run. So I found out the second week of August that I was the Democratic nominee. One of the questions, though, that I get from a lot of people is, what does the commissioner do? And it's really important for voters to understand that. So one of the things that I decided to do was to make sure that everybody that's canvassing with me has a handout that talks about what is the Jefferson County Commission? What do they do? So it's just important for people to be informed. Yeah.
I love that. And it's about the, kind of to your story too, about like the 20 judges. And it's like, we often don't know what we're voting for.
I'm helping organize a rally for democracy in Boonesboro, Maryland. It's scheduled for Saturday, October the 19th, from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock in Schaefer Park in Boonesboro. And it's being advertised, it's sponsored by my United Democrats of Washington County. However, it is a nonpartisan event that we're just trying to raise the awareness of the importance of this election to our democracy. Anybody who likes to come, love to have you.
After our bus. I was like, oh, I'll be there. I'll be flying back from San Francisco. But love that idea.
I've got a little problem with nonpartisan. Lots of people, you really wouldn't want them to vote, would you? I mean, after all, you can say to somebody, you know, you got to get out there to vote. But you may know who this person's going to vote for, and the last thing you want is for the person they're voting for to win. What do you do with that? You network must have an answer to this.
We do. Mm-hmm. And I will say that is...
We hear you, Dennis. We feel your pain. However, what we're finding in this very polarized time, some people who are like, you know, they're not like the high volume voters who like know all the candidates and get excited about the school board and everything, they get turned off when we start talking about parties or certain candidates. What captures their imagination is back to these issues. And so if you really get them thinking about, okay, what are the issues that are important to you this election, and then you have them evaluate candidates, they're much more likely they're being motivated by their own values and their own concerns. That works for almost anything, but we found out very early on that it especially works for the child tax credit. So, and I'm not saying that's the only thing that's still a single issue, but right, getting people to start with their values and then looking at candidates, and then they're like, oh, now I want to go vote. So then you register them.
The other day, is it on? Yeah, just talk like. Oh, okay. The other day, I had a conversation with a very wonderful friend, and she said she wasn't going to vote at all. Well, you know, that came across my mind early on. However, learning more about both sides, I said to her, I have a question for you. Do you want to save our democracy? And I think that's so very, very important. And then you don't get into other controversial subjects that would offend your friend or acquaintance or whoever. And so we don't know who they will vote for, but this is a really, really important question. Do we want to have a democracy or do we want to have a dictator? And so I think that we need to pray. We need to pray and focus again that God is in control and He will bless us as long as we're connected with Him.
Thank you so much. And I think that is a great way to kind of bring this to a close. I know that we could talk about the ways that we're going to support our democracy this election year and beyond, and we could keep going. And it is being informed, it's being engaged. It's asking those hard questions and having the hard conversations, and then being committed, so being able to do something about that. And as we wrap up on our piece, I know that there was a clipboard going around at some point in time. If you have not put your name, your contact information on there, and you would like to receive our materials, please make sure you do that before you walk out. Up here, up front, we have our Connection magazines. I'm going to just hold one up. We have 3 different issues. This is a magazine we send out quarterly. Has tons of good articles and information. We have there we go. It has a membership form. This is our hot off the press resource on Project 2025 and Catholic social teaching. And it's a side-by-side. I encourage everyone to take one of these. I think it's an excellent, excellent resource. And then we have our Equally Sacred checklist. We have a lot of copies, so feel free to take many copies and share them with friends, family, parishioners, etc. And then we also have our yard sign. And this, we sell our yard sign on our website for $20, and we do have a couple of them with us, so if anyone would like to purchase a yard sign, we are happy to do that. And also, please check out all of our resources at networkadvocates.org, and follow us along for our bus trip on nunsonthebus.org. And it was absolutely wonderful being here with all of you. I look forward to seeing you all again and to being back.
So we are kicking off September 30th in Philadelphia, and we think about this trip in 3 different legs. So we have kind of a East Coast up to Long Island and New Haven, Connecticut, and ending in Ithaca, New York. Then we kind of do what I call our Rust Belt tour from Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Gary, Indiana, and Detroit and Milwaukee and Chicago. Then you see that long line with no stops. That's because staff is flying and the bus is quietly driving through the night to Tucson, where we pick up our final southwest and west coast leg. And Eilish is really planning all those stops and just coming up with, we're going to go visit the United Farm Workers in just outside of Bakersfield, and just all these other incredible stops along the way in the Southwest and the West Coast. And we're ending in San Francisco. So we said we're kicking off in the city of brotherly love and ending in the city of St. Francis.